When we talk about the history of China, we are not just speaking of a single nation, but of one of the world's oldest civilizations that stretches back thousands of years. Ancient China laid the foundation for what would become one of the most powerful, advanced, and enduring cultures on Earth. Among the earliest stories of China's past, two dynasties stand at the beginning of its historical memory, the Xia and the Shang. But before we focus on the details of these dynasties, we must understand why they are so important. They represent the earliest known attempts to form centralized political structures in the Chinese lands, and they shaped the myths, traditions, and cultural practices that later dynasties built upon. The Xia Dynasty is often called the first dynasty of China, even though its existence has been debated for many years. Ancient texts, such as the writings of the historian Sima Qian, tell us that the Xia ruled from around 2070 BCE to 1600 BCE. Whether the Xia were purely legendary or truly historical has been a subject of debate. But modern archaeological discoveries suggest that there was indeed an early civilization in the Yellow River Valley that matches descriptions of the Xia. This valley, known as the cradle of Chinese civilization, was a fertile region where agriculture, settlements, and eventually dynasties began to take shape. At the center of Xia's story is a figure known as Yu the Great. According to legend, Yu was a remarkable leader who gained fame because of his success in controlling the devastating floods of the Yellow River. Before Yu, floods would regularly destroy farmlands and wipe out villages, making survival extremely difficult. His father Gun had tried to control the waters but failed. Yu, however, worked tirelessly for years, digging canals and guiding the waters back into the sea. It is said that he worked for 13 years without ever returning home, even passing by his house 3 times without stepping inside. So dedicated was he to his mission. Because of his success, Yu became the hero of the people and later the founder of the Xia Dynasty. This story reflects more than just mythology. It shows how important water management was to early Chinese society, and how leadership was tied to the ability to bring order to nature. The Xia Dynasty is believed to have consisted of a series of rulers from Yu's family line. These rulers are thought to have governed over tribal groups in the region, bringing them under one authority. This was an important development, as it marked the beginning of hereditary kingship in Chinese history. While previous leaders may have been chosen by consensus or strength, the IHI introduced the idea that leadership could pass down within a single family, creating a dynasty. The political structure of the Xia was simple compared to later dynasties, but it laid the groundwork for Chinese statecraft. The rulers were considered the supreme authority, both politically and spiritually. They were responsible not only for governance, but also for maintaining harmony between heaven, earth, and human society. This early concept would evolve into what later dynasties called the mandate of heaven, the idea that rulers governed with divine approval, but could lose that approval if they became unjust or corrupt. Life in the Xia Dynasty revolved around agriculture. The fertile soils of the Yellow River allowed communities to grow millet and rice, which became staple foods. Tools made of stone and bronze were used in farming, hunting, and building. Archaeological sites such as Erlitou and Henan province have revealed evidence of bronze smelting, palaces, and early urban planning, all of which point to the existence of an organized and advanced society during the Xia period. These discoveries provide us with tangible proof that supports what ancient texts had long claimed. Culturally, the Xia people practiced ancestor worship, a tradition that would remain central to Chinese civilization for centuries. They believed their ancestors could influence the living, so rituals and offerings were made to honor them. These practices also reinforced the authority of the ruling family, who were seen as the link between the people and the spiritual world. Despite these advances, the Xia Dynasty eventually faced decline. Historical accounts suggest that the later rulers became corrupt and oppressive. The last king of Xia, Jie, is remembered as a tyrant who brought misery to his people. His cruelty and excesses weakened the dynasty, leading to rebellion. This paved the way for the rise of the Shang Dynasty, which would follow Xia and create even more lasting contributions to Chinese history. Whether one views the Xia dynasty as purely historical or partly mythical, its significance cannot be denied. It marks the symbolic beginning of Chinese dynastic history. It is the starting point of a tradition where rulers claimed authority not just through force, but also through divine right and moral responsibility. The stories of Yu the Great continue to inspire ideas of selflessness, dedication, and leadership. His example showed that the ruler's duty was not to live in luxury, but to serve the people and protect their livelihood. In understanding the Xia dynasty, we also understand how early Chinese society viewed power, morality, and order. The importance of controlling floods reflected their relationship with nature. The practice of ancestor worship reflected their belief in continuity between past, present, and future. The emergence of hereditary kingship reflected their desire for stability and structure. These elements combined to create the foundation for one of the world's most remarkable civilizations. In conclusion, the Xia dynasty, though wrapped in legend, is a critical chapter in ancient China's story. It tells us about the struggles of early communities along the Yellow River, their triumphs over nature, their devotion to ancestors, and their first steps towards centralized rule. Without the Xia, the dynasties that followed, Shangzhou, and many others, would not have had the foundation upon which to build. Thus, to study ancient China is to begin with the Xia dynasty, where myth and history blend together to form the roots of a civilization that still shapes the world today. When we step deeper into the history of the Xia dynasty, our attention naturally shifts from the rulers and legends to the everyday lives of the people who lived under their rule. Understanding society, culture, and religion during this time allows us to see how ordinary people contributed to the formation of one of the world's oldest civilizations. Even though written records are scarce, and much of what we know comes from later sources, archaeological findings and ancient stories help us reconstruct the world of Xia. The society of the Xia dynasty was primarily agricultural. The Yellow River Valley provided fertile soil, and people grew millet, rice, and other grains. Farming was not simply a way to feed families, it was the backbone of the economy. The Xia people learned to manage water through irrigation and canal systems, skills that were essential because the Yellow River was both a source of life and a source of destruction. Droughts could ruin crops, and floods could destroy entire settlements. This made the management of water not just a technical matter, but also a political and religious one. Leaders were judged by their ability to protect farmlands, which is why Yu the Great's reputation was built on flood control. In Xia society, family played the most important role. Communities were organized around clans, where extended families lived together, shared responsibilities, and worked the land. The father was the head of the household, and authority passed down through male heirs. This patriarchal system reflected the growing importance of hereditary leadership, not only in families but also in ruling dynasties. Marriage was arranged, and women played a vital role in domestic life and farming. Though their social status was generally lower than that of men, the Xia dynasty is also remembered for its cultural developments. Although this period was still early in Chinese history, people had already begun experimenting with bronze casting. Bronze was used to make weapons, tools, and ritual vessels. The skill of working with bronze would later reach a peak in the Shang Dynasty, but the Xia period laid the groundwork. Archaeologists at Erlitou have uncovered workshops, palaces, and artifacts that show the Xia were capable of organized urban life. The presence of roads, walled enclosures, and planned layouts indicate that Xia settlements were more than simple villages. They were early. Cities' religion during the Xia period centered on ancestor worship. The Xia believed that their ancestors were not gone after death but continued to play a role in the lives of the living. Offerings of food, wine, and other goods were made to please the spirits. Families believed that neglecting these rituals could bring misfortune, while devotion could bring blessings. This practice gave religion a very personal and family-centered quality. Every household had obligations toward its ancestors. These obligations reinforced loyalty within the family structure. The ruling elite of Xia also used religion to legitimize their power. Kings were seen as mediators between the people and the heavens. When natural disasters struck, it was interpreted as a sign that the king had failed in his duties. This belief would evolve into the concept of the mandate of heaven in later dynasties. But its roots can be traced back to the Xia period. The idea that rulers needed divine approval gave their authority a sacred character, but it also created a moral check on their power. If a ruler became cruel or incompetent, he risked losing the support of heaven and the loyalty of his people. Cultural life in Xia society was simple compared to later dynasties, but it was not without beauty. Pottery was crafted for daily use as well as for ritual purposes. Designs were often simple, but they reveal an eye for form and function. Music and dance also played roles in both celebration and ritual, though we know less about the details. Oral traditions, myths, and songs likely circulated among the people. Preserving collective memory, the social structure of Xia was divided into classes. At the top was the ruling family and noble clans who controlled land and resources. Below them were common farmers, who formed the majority of the population. Farmers worked the land not only for their families, but also for the ruling elite, who demanded taxes or tributes in grain and labor. Craftsmen, such as bronze workers and potters, occupied a special place in society, as their skills were essential for both economy and ritual. At the bottom of society were slaves or captives who were often forced into labor. This hierarchy reflects a society becoming more complex and stratified, moving away from purely tribal equality. Religion, culture, and society were all interconnected. A farmer tilling his field did so under the blessing of ancestors and the oversight of rulers who claimed spiritual authority. A craftsman casting bronze vessels was not just making tools but also producing sacred objects used in rituals. A ruler performing sacrifices was not just a political figure but also a religious leader, ensuring harmony between heaven and earth. The Xia dynasty may seem distant, but its legacy is powerful. The emphasis on family ties became a central feature of Chinese culture for millennia. The practice of ancestor worship continued to be one of the defining features of Chinese spirituality. The integration of politics and religion laid the foundation for dynastic rule, where rulers were judged not only by their military or economic achievements but also by their moral and spiritual integrity. In the end, the society, culture, and religion of Xia show us a people in transition. They were no longer simple tribes, yet not as advanced as the dynasties that would follow. They lived in a world where myths and history blended together, where farming was life, where family was sacred, and where rulers were guardians of both earth and heaven. To study their way of life is to see the roots of values that would define Chinese civilization for thousands of years. The story of the Shang Dynasty begins with the decline of the Xia. Ancient records describe the last Xia king, Jie, as a cruel and corrupt ruler who abused his power, ignored his people's suffering, and indulged in luxury. His tyranny created unrest, and eventually a noble named Tang rose in rebellion. Thames defeated Jie and established the Shang Dynasty around 1600 BCE. With this change of power, China entered a new and more historically documented era. Unlike the Xia, whose existence is still debated, the Shang Dynasty left behind clear archaeological evidence, inscriptions, and relics. It is here that myth gives way to history. The Shang Dynasty lasted nearly 6 centuries. From about 1600 BCE to 1046 BCE during this time, it developed a strong political system, advanced technologies, and a rich culture that made it one of the most influential early dynasties. The Shang kings ruled from a succession of capitals, the most famous being at Anyang, where excavations have uncovered palaces, tombs, bronze vessels, and oracle bones that tell us about their society. Politically, the Shang Dynasty was a monarchy with the king as the supreme ruler. The king not only governed the land but also served as the chief priest, conducting sacrifices to ancestors and deities. He held absolute authority, but his power was supported by a network of nobles and officials. These nobles often belonged to related clans and controlled local regions on behalf of the king. This system of decentralized rule allowed the Shang to expand their territory and maintain control over a wide area. The Shang military was also crucial to their power. Armies were organized, equipped with bronze weapons and led by nobles loyal to the king. Warfare played a central role in Shang politics, both for defending their land and for expanding their influence. Victories in battle not only brought territory, but also prisoners of war, who were often enslaved or sacrificed in religious rituals. The Shang saw war as an extension of divine will, believing that their conquests were blessed by the ancestors and spirits. The Shang kings also maintained power through the use of religion and divination. Oracle bones, made from animal bones or turtle shells, were used to communicate with the spiritual world. Questions about harvests, warfare, weather, or the future were carved into the bones. After being heated, cracks appeared, which were then interpreted by diviners as answers from the gods or ancestors. These inscriptions are the earliest known form of Chinese writing, giving us a direct window into the thoughts and concerns of Shang rulers. Economically, the Shang dynasty benefited from agriculture, but it also thrived through trade and craft production. Bronze casting reached a high level of sophistication, producing not only weapons but also intricate ritual vessels. These vessels were used in ceremonies to honor ancestors and gods, reinforcing the religious and political authority of the king. The ability to control bronze production gave the Shang a technological edge over their rivals and strengthened their dominance. The Shang rulers legitimized their authority by claiming close ties to the ancestors and gods. Their political power was inseparable from spiritual power. If a king failed in his duties, natural disasters or military defeats were seen as signs that he had lost divine support. This concept, which began in earlier times, became more formalized in the Shang dynasty and set the stage for the Xia Dynasty's doctrine of the mandate of heaven. Over the centuries, the Shang dynasty became stronger, but eventually its rulers, like those of the Xia before them, grew weak and corrupt. The last Shang King Jie was remembered as a tyrant who wasted resources and oppressed his people. His downfall opened the way for the rise of the Zhou dynasty, which would replace the Shang and continue the dynastic cycle of Chinese history. The political and military structures of the Shang dynasty left a lasting legacy. They demonstrated how centralized authority, supported by religion and warfare, could maintain control over vast territories. The Shang also showed how technology and culture could be used to strengthen political power. By combining political authority, military strength, and religious legitimacy, they created a model of rulership that influenced centuries of Chinese governance. To understand the Shang dynasty fully, we must look beyond politics and examine the everyday lives, beliefs, and achievements of its people. The Shang period was one of remarkable cultural growth, technological progress, and religious development. It was a society that blended practical life with deep spirituality, creating traditions that continued for centuries. The Shang social structure was hierarchical and divided into distinct classes. At the top was the king, who held both political and religious authority. Below him were the nobles, who acted as military leaders and regional governors. These nobles enjoyed wealth and privilege, owning large estates and commanding armies. The next class consisted of artisans and craftsmen, especially bronze workers, who played a critical role in society. Their skills produced weapons, tools, and ritual vessels that were essential for both survival and religion. Farmers made up the largest portion of the population. They worked the fields, growing millet, wheat, and rice to feed society. At the bottom of the hierarchy were slaves, often prisoners of war, who were forced into hard labor or used in ritual sacrifices. Religion dominated Shang life. Ancestor worship was at the heart of their beliefs. Families made offerings to their deceased relatives, seeking guidance and blessings. The king, however, had the unique role of communicating with the most powerful ancestors and deities on behalf of the entire society. This reinforced his authority as the link between heaven and earth. The Shang believed that neglecting rituals could bring disaster, while proper devotion could bring prosperity. Oracle bones were the most distinctive religious practice of the Shang through divination. Kings and priests sought answers about the future, asking questions about war, harvests, illness, and natural events. These bones not only guided decisions but also recorded history, giving us the earliest examples of Chinese writing. From them, we learn about the concerns of Shang rulers and the rhythms. Their bronze vessels were not just practical tools, but also works of art, decorated with intricate designs and used in rituals. Bronze weapons gave the Shang military superiority, allowing them to dominate rivals. This mastery of bronze set the Shang apart from other early civilizations and symbolized their power. Other achievements included advances in astronomy and calendar making. The Shang observed the heavens, linking celestial events to earthly affairs. This helped them plan agricultural activities and religious ceremonies. Their growing knowledge of time and seasons reflects a society increasingly organized and aware of its environment. Art and culture flourished in the Shang period. Jade carving, pottery, and weaving showed high levels of craftsmanship. Music and dance were also important, often performed in rituals or court ceremonies. These cultural expressions were not only forms of beauty, but also reinforced social order and religious devotion. The Shang left behind monumental tombs, such as the royal graves at Anyang, filled with treasures, weapons, and even human sacrifices. These tombs reflect the wealth and power of the Shang elite, as well as their beliefs in an afterlife where the dead would need companions and possessions. Despite their achievements, the Shang rulers eventually became corrupt. The last king's cruelty and excesses alienated his people, leading to rebellion. Yet even after their fall, the achievements of the Shang remained influential. Their writing system became the foundation for Chinese characters. Their bronze technology inspired future generations. Their religious practices shaped the spiritual outlook of later dynasties. In short, the society, religion, and achievements of the Shang dynasty show us a civilization at its height organized, spiritual, artistic, and powerful. It was a world where ancestors guided the living, where rulers combined politics with religion, and where technology and art were used to strengthen authority. The legacy of the Shang is one of the richest in early Chinese history, and its influence continued long after the dynasty itself had disappeared. Now that we have explored both the Xia and the Shang dynasties, it is time to compare them and consider their legacies. Though separated by myth and history, these two dynasties together represent the foundations of ancient China. The Xia dynasty is often seen as the beginning, the symbolic first dynasty. Much of what we know about it comes from legends and later writings, such as those of Sima Qian, its most famous figure. Yu, the Great, symbolizes the values of hard work, dedication, and service to the people. Archaeological evidence at Erlitou suggests a complex society existed at that time, but details remain uncertain. The Xia is therefore a blend of history and mythology, but its importance lies in the traditions it began: hereditary kingship, ancestor worship, and the link between political and spiritual authority. The Shang Dynasty, on the other hand, is firmly grounded in history. With oracle bone inscriptions, bronze artifacts, and royal tombs, the Shang provide us with clear evidence of their existence. They took the practices of the IAS and developed them further. Ancestor worship became more formalized. Bronze technology reached new heights, and the beginnings of Chinese writing appeared. Politically, the Shang created a more organized monarchy, supported by nobles and military strength. When we compare the two dynasties, several differences stand out. The Xia remains more mysterious, remembered mostly for its legendary founder and its symbolic role as the first dynasty. The Shang, however, stand as the first truly historical dynasty, with a wealth of evidence showing their culture, religion, and power. The Xia laid the foundation. The Shang built upon it. Yet there are also important continuities. Both dynasties emphasize the importance of ancestors and the role of rulers as mediators between heaven and earth. Both relied on agriculture in the Yellow River Valley and saw water management as vital to survival. Both also followed the pattern of rise and decline, with early rulers remembered as virtuous and later rulers condemned as corrupt. This cycle of virtue and corruption became a recurring theme in Chinese history. The legacy of the Xia and Shang dynasties is immense. They introduced the idea of dynastic rule, which shaped Chinese politics for thousands of years. They established traditions of ancestor worship and ritual that remain central to Chinese culture. They developed technologies and artistic achievements that influenced future generations. Perhaps most importantly, they created a framework for understanding history itself. By remembering the Xia as the first dynasty and the Shang as the first historical dynasty. Later, Chinese thinkers created a narrative of continuity and identity. In conclusion, the Xia and Shang dynasties together formed the roots of Chinese civilization. The Xia, shrouded in legend, remind us of the power of myth and memory. The Shang, grounded in evidence, show us the reality of early statehood and cultural achievement. Together, they demonstrate how myth and history blend to create a national identity. Their legacy is not just in artifacts and texts, but in the enduring values of family, morality, and continuity that define Chinese culture even today.